The silence between them was deafening, the kind that makes your heartbeat sound like thunder in your ears. Her hand hovered near her weapon, fingers trembling, not from fear, but from something else. Caution, maybe. Curiosity. She had been trained to see them as enemies, as dangers from beyond the stars. Every briefing, every warning, every news broadcast painted them in the same shade of dread. They were the destroyers, the invaders, the monsters. And yet, in this moment, none of that mattered. She looked at the creature standing before her. Towering, alien, undeniably not of this world, but not monstrous. Not in the way they'd been described. Its movements were deliberate, almost gentle. Its eyes, deep, reflective pools of intelligence, watched her, not with malice, but with something that felt eerily like recognition. A mirrored kind of surprise. As if it, too, had never expected this moment to happen like this. There were no weapons raised. No sudden movements. Just two beings, one human, one extraterrestrial, locked in an unspoken standoff shaped more by wonder than aggression. She scanned its features, the strange contours of its skin, the subtle glow beneath the surface, the barely visible rise and fall of breath, if that's what it was. But it was the eyes that held her attention. There was something old in them, something ancient yet alive with thought. There was pain, maybe even loss. But there was also a softness that defied the entire narrative she'd been fed. She took a slow breath, grounding herself. The weight of her mission still sat heavily on her shoulders, but something else had crept in, doubt, perhaps, or understanding. She lowered her weapon, just a little. Enough to say, "I'm not here to fight. Not if I don't have to." It didn't flinch. If anything, the creature relaxed. Its posture shifted ever so slightly, still tall, still imposing, but less like a predator, more like a sentient being finally given the chance to be heard. A gust of wind carried the distant sounds of chaos, explosions, static transmissions, sirens. The world was still at war, still wrapped in fear. But here, in this pocket of unexpected calm, something else was taking root. She took a small step forward. So did it, every instinct. Inside her screamed to stay on guard, to expect the worst. But her heart whispered another truth. This was not an enemy. Not in this moment. This was a being with a story of its own. Maybe it had loved. Maybe it had lost. Maybe it had fought because it was told to, just like she had. And maybe, just maybe, it had never wanted this war any more than she did. Her breath caught in her throat. She realized she wasn't looking at a threat anymore. She was looking at someone. Someone different, yes, but someone who felt, the moment stretched between them like a fragile thread of light. Anything could have broken it, one wrong move, one burst of panic. But nothing did. They stood together, eyes locked, fear giving way to something deeper. Respect. Recognition. The quiet hope that things might not be as broken as everyone believed. She felt something shift inside her, a cracking open, a softening. She saw not the alien that others feared, but the soul that others had missed. And in doing so, she found a part of her own humanity she didn't know was missing. Maybe the real battle wasn't against a species, but against the idea that some lives are worth less simply because they're unfamiliar. Maybe peace starts not with treaties or technology, but with moments like this when two beings dare to see past the fear and find the soul on the other side. The world had shifted beneath the weight of endless conflict. Cities had crumbled into dust, skies were veiled in smoke, and the lines between survival and extinction blurred long ago. In that chaos where even the bravest faltered, it was a Faltura child who stepped forward, not with innocence lost, but with determination forged in fire. Clad in armor too large for their frame, carrying burdens too heavy for their age. The figures stood alone at the edge of the void, staring into something no one had dared approach before. The unknown loomed in front of them, not just in form, but in meaning. A presence not yet understood, not yet classified as friend or foe. What lay ahead wasn't just a physical being, but a question. A question about the fate of everything behind the child, the people, the memories, the species they represented. What would this encounter mean? What outcome waited in the next breath? They didn't shake. It didn't retreat. The armor, though scratched and scorched, gleamed faintly in the dying light of the sun, a symbol of resilience, of an entire civilization's last remaining hope distilled into a single figure. Each step they took forward echoed across the battlefield. Like a promise not of destruction but of courage. Behind them, silence stretched. Not because the war was over, but because for a moment, the war paused. Not a ceasefire signed in ink, but one written in awe. Everyone watched. From command centers deep underground to bunkers filled with frightened families, eyes turned to the lone child who dared to stand when even the strongest had fallen. The unknown didn't move at first. It observed, measured, considered. Its presence was immense, beyond comprehension, a shape that defied earthly laws. But still, it waited. It recognized something in the figure before it, not threat, but purpose. Not a soldier, but a symbol. The child's helmet tilted slightly upward, as if acknowledging this silent understanding. No words were exchanged. None were needed. There are moments where language fails, where only presence can speak. And in that instant, the child's presence spoke volumes. It said, "I am not afraid of you. I am here because no one else can be." It said, "I don't know what you are, but I know what I am. I am what remains." The armor, though battle-worn, had been passed down, piece by piece, from those who came before. A patchwork of loss and love, of sacrifice and strength. Each dent was a memory, each scratch a name. That armor didn't just protect, it remembered. And in wearing it, the child carried the legacy of an entire species. But even more than that, the child carried a question. Could the unknown become understood? Could something alien become something else, not an enemy, but a possibility? With every breath, the child stood not to fight, but to ask, to see, to understand. And in that bravery, something ancient stirred. Wind picked up dust around their feet, carrying the scent of fire and ozone. Still they stood, unwavering. In their stance, there was something transcendent, something that reached past the war, past the pain, and into the realm of hope. Kind of hope that doesn't shout, but whispers, maybe we're not finished yet. What met them across the divide wasn't just a being, but the weight of 1,000 questions unanswered. The void between them wasn't filled with weapons, but with potential. And though the child was small, though the odds were cruel and the universe colder than anyone had imagined, this moment shone with the light of a new possibility. Not all battles are won by force. Not all saviors wield destruction. Sometimes, the future is shaped by those who are willing to stand alone, to meet the unknown not with rage, but with readiness. Sometimes, humanity's last hope arrives not in thunder, but in quiet defiance. An armored child, staring into the impossible and refusing to break. The battlefield was a wasteland of ash and echoes. A place where noise had become the language of survival. Explosions, gunfire, commands shouted through cracked radios. But in that one fleeting moment, silence ruled. Not the silence of absence, but a silence thick with meaning, hanging in the air like the first breath after a storm. Two figures stood across from one another, the chaos of the world falling away as their gazes locked. Asterisk neither moved, neither raised a weapon. What passed between them wasn't aggression or strategy, it was something older, something deeper. The connection wasn't forged in words or actions, but in the intensity of a single look. In that instant, history and fear stepped back, and the rawness of emotion took center stage. The kind of emotion that doesn't need translation, doesn't belong to one species or one planet. It just is. Asterisk they had every reason to fight. Every instinct, every command, every scar they carried had prepared them for conflict. But in each other's eyes, they saw something that didn't match the stories they'd been told. Not hatred, not evil, but reflection. As if each had suddenly seen a mirror where an enemy was supposed to be. A flash of understanding, unspoken, but undeniable. Asterisk war doesn't often allow for such moments. It teaches to strike first, to question later, if at all. Yet in that shared stare, there was a quiet rebellion. A refusal to be just another part of the machine that demanded destruction. There was hesitation not from weakness, but from realization. A dawning truth. Maybe this wasn't the only path. Asterisk around them, time felt suspended. The sky, heavy with smoke and fire, seemed to soften. The earth, scarred and scorched, held still. Even distant screams and blasts faded into the background. Everything gave way to the gravity of that moment, to the silent conversation unfolding between two beings who should have been enemies, but for one heartbeat were not. Asterisk it wasn't about surrender. It wasn't about victory. It was about recognition. The subtle, almost imperceptible way that their shoulders lowered, their breath slowed. There was fear, yes. But more than that, there was awe. A kind of sacred stillness that only happens when souls, stripped of titles and armor, simply meet. Asterisk the moment was brief, but its impact rippled outward. Others saw it. Fighters on both sides paused, weapons frozen mid-air. They didn't understand why, but something in that gaze spoke. Louder than war ever could. Something ancient and human and real. It reminded them of something they had forgotten amid the blood and smoke, what it means to feel, to see, to care. Asterisk there was no truce signed in that instant. No grand speech, no handshake. Just a look. And yet, it was enough to shift something maybe. Small, maybe monumental. In every war, there are turning points. Not all are marked by flags or explosions. Some are marked by stillness, by vulnerability, by the choice to see instead of strike. Asterisk, and that's what happened here. In the crossfire of war, amidst the ruins of hope, two hearts chose to speak. Not with words, but with presence. Not with force, but with truth. In doing so, they reminded the universe that even at the edge of annihilation, connection is still possible. Even in the darkest moments, the light of understanding can flicker. Asterisk. That look, that shared breath, that pause, it meant something. It didn't erase the pain or undo the past, but it cracked open the possibility of something better, of change. Of peace not yet born, but conceived in that fragile, fearless glance. Asterisk sometimes, the loudest message is the one never spoken. And sometimes, a single meeting of eyes can echo louder than any battle cry. Asterisk. In the aftermath of that shared gaze, something unshakable settled in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. It wasn't a resolution or a promise, but a quiet shift, a realization that even amidst war, something beautiful could still emerge. For too long, the story had been one of fear and retaliation, of enemies defined not by who they truly were, but by how different they appeared. But in that moment, those differences faded. What remained was a spark of understanding, brief but brilliant. Asterisk that single glance had cracked through layers of hatred and history, reaching into the core of something far older than conflict, empathy. It didn't require a flag to wave or a side to choose. It simply asked those who watched and those who felt to see beyond the armor, beyond the orders, beyond the alien or the human. It asked them to see the sold out asterisk. The world didn't change overnight. The war didn't end in a blink. But a seed was planted, subtle, fragile, yet powerful. And that seed took root in the minds of those who began to question everything they thought they knew. If connection was possible in the most impossible of moments, what else might be possible? If one look could silence the drums of war, even for a heartbeat, then maybe peace wasn't just a dream. Maybe it was a choice. Asterisk, and it starts small. Not with declarations, but with decisions. To listen instead of shout. To see instead of judge. To meet difference not with fear, but with curiosity. That moment between them, timeless and wordless, that courage doesn't always look like charging into battle. Sometimes it looks like standing still. Like meeting someone's gaze and choosing not to see a threat, but a story. Asterisk, long after the dust settles and the scars of war begin to fade, that moment will be remembered not because it was loud, but because it was real. Because in a world fractured by fear, two beings found a way to speak without language, to feel without touch, to understand without needing anything more than eye contact. It was a reminder that peace is not born from strength alone, but from the willingness to reach across the void and truly see the other side. Asterisk. That's where hope lives, in the quiet, in the stillness, in the choice to pause. And sometimes that's all it takes. One pause, one glance, one shared moment that reminds us we are not so different after all. Asterisk.